Hello, well I'm doing the welting on my shoes today, and that's a strip of leather which will be going around the front or sole portion here all the way around, but not the heel, and it joins the upper and the midsole to the outsole, so it's a bit like a joining piece. And I've just got a little bit I've trimmed off here to get an idea of how I'm going to do it. But if you can think of it as a strip of leather going around, I'll be stitching it through to the midsole here and to the upper, and then later on I'll be putting in another row of stitches which will join the welt to the outsole. So as I say, it is like a joining piece, joins the two bits together. Anyway, special way of making welts apparently, so I'm going to copy the old tried and trusted way of having a beveled edge and a groove, which I will show you. There are also going to be one or two quite interesting tools I will briefly show you in this one, which are quite interesting from a historical point of view. Anyway, we'll get going. So I've got my strip of leather here, and what I'm going to do next is, that's the top grain side, but on the flesh side I'm going to put a groove in 6mm off the edge. So I've got a little grooving sort of tool here which I will be using to just put a little groove in. So just go along and it takes out a little whisper of leather. Very useful if you're wanting to recess stitching. So this will actually give me like a marked stitch line, and I'll give it 2 or 3 passes to get a little bit of depth on my groove. And you can soon begin to see it getting quite nicely defined. So this is what the little grooving tool looks like a bit closer up. Just has a little cutter on the end there that digs out the channel. So I've got my groove on the flesh side there on both pieces. I'm now going to very faintly on the top grain, so turn it over, put a similar groove but not nearly as deep, just a little. You can buy ready-made welting, but I think it's more interesting to have a go at making my own. It's all part of my little journey on all of this. Right, okay. What I'm going to do now is skive from this line I've just marked, skive down at 45 degrees roughly, but go down to the edge. So I suppose strictly it's a bit under 45 degrees, but I'm going to skive so that it becomes, I'm cutting this off here, so I'll be going along and just tapering this edge. And the reason for that is that this will be sitting against the wall of the shoe, and I want it to sort of sit there nicely. So I've got my skiving knife, and I'm just going to go along here watching my fingers and taking it down. Obviously could do this on a machine, but it's a bit more fun to do it by hand. Give myself a little challenge. Some people actually set up an angled blade on their desk and then pull this through, and they cut the piece off that way. So there are various ways you can do this. So what I'm doing, hopefully you can just about see this, I am taking a bevel off essentially, leaving a little bit of margin here, so I'm not making it a complete feather edge. I'm beveling it down to something like 1mm will be my aim. I'll clean it up in a minute. So I'll go along here just doing this and get it done all the way along on both pieces. So I've now made both my welts, and essentially what I've got is the top grain and then this bevel going down to the edge. So the bevel starts 6mm in, goes down. On the other side I've got this groove line, again 6mm off the edge, and as I say, the whole thing's 15mm. So what will be happening is I will be stitching this onto the bottom of the shoe here. So it'll be going around, I'll wet it so I get it around the sort of curvature of the toe, etc. But I'll be stitching it down, and later on I'll be then trimming it to fit neatly on the outside, also fixing my outsole to it and stitching the outsole of this. So that's sort of broadly how it works. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to soak this to get it around the toe area, to sort of mould it around a bit, and I'll put the odd tack in just to hold it in position. So I'm just going to wet this enough to like make it pliable. So I don't want it completely like soaking wet, but I want it to be sort of movable and pliable. So I'll put a bit of water on each side where it's got the maximum like curvature, and try and encourage that to then bend around the front of the shoe. Again, I'm just using a garden sprayer. It's quite a good way of getting a controlled flood. So I've soaked my welt, and I've just sort of like tacked it into position roughly where it's going to be going. So if you look at it from the top, you can just see it coming around the edge, not being terribly prominent. There it is. So I'm hoping that I can now use my awl and go in and pick up these original holes and start sewing this down. That's the plan. I'll pull out the tacks as I do it and then be sewing as I go along. Now, the sewing is quite an interesting sort of area, and I've been sort of looking into this a bit because there are various ways that you can do it. And one of the ones is to make up your own thread, and then to actually use boar bristles as needles. Now, going back in history, needles were not only very expensive, they were also quite clubby. So people actually preferred to use something thin like a boar's bristle, and they would attach the boar bristle to the sewing thread, usually a flax thread, using code. Now I've shown how I made code in another video, but code is basically beeswax and pine resin, and it's really sticky. So they'd attach the thread to this boar bristle and then sew it on. Now I'll show you in a minute, just very quickly as a quick detour, how one can make the thread and how you can attach it to a boar's bristle. I'm actually going to be doing this slightly differently because I have realised, as you know, this is my first attempt at shoemaking. I have made these channels, I think in a way I've made two mistakes in terms of making my little holes for the sewing. One is I've made them very deep down, and the other is I haven't done it with like one push of my awl. I've done it from both sides going through, and the drawback with that is that I don't have a completely uniform tube of a hole. I have a hole with like ridges in it, and that's going to make a slight little problem for me. See, ideally what I would have done when I was making each of these stitch holes going around inside here and coming out, I would have done it as one push through, and then if you have like a bristle going through, it won't be catching. Whereas I've done it from both sides and at slightly different angles and what have you, and if I try and put a bristle or something through, it actually gets sort of caught on the walls. So if I was doing this a second time, I would definitely do it as one operation. So that's just one, if you like, learning point that I've had. But anyway, before we get on with this, I will quickly show you a couple of other things. So this is flax linen thread, and it's single strand, single ply. Very hard to find nowadays, as most threads, modern threads, are ply. But this is an old reel, I think quite a good number of years old. And what you can do is you can ply it yourself. So you can put a bit of code on there and twist it. Now, the very, very ancient way, and I haven't been able to find any good articles on this, so if anyone knows anything on the internet about how this used to be done, I have here a very old Cordwainers spinning top, and this was used to make the threads up, and I'll show you how I think it was probably used, but if anyone has anything more, it would be great. This particular one looks like it's made out of elm, and it's been pole lathed turned. It's got all the original ridges in it still. So it is a lovely old bit of kit, pretty rare, so I don't think you'll find these, you know, very easily. But certainly I've been looking for articles on how they were used, and there's nothing. So I'll show you how I think it was done, and I'll show you, I haven't been able to get any large boar bristles. So I'm in the UK, and I really wanted to have some big, proper, full-size 7-8 inch boar bristles. I could send off to the States, I could send off to Germany and get some. I have got some boar bristles that are used for fly fishing, but they're rather small by comparison. But I'll show you the principle very quickly of how the thread was made and how it was attached to the boar bristle. So first of all, I'll just show you, I've got a single ply thread here. I'll take off a section and I'll just show you how it's can be made into a 2-ply thread. So I just find the middle section in the thread. I take my Cordwainers spinning top, put the loop through, and then I can start spinning. Now it will grip a lot better and hold its spin if I just put a bit of code on the thread first of all. So I'm just working this little bit of code up in my fingers. Let's say it's beeswax and pine resin, and there is a video I've done on making this. I actually made quite a lot of it, a lifetime supply I think. Anyway, I've got a little bit here, just softening it up in my fingers. It gets very sticky once it gets up warmer, and all I'm going to do is literally just rub it along the thread. So I've got my loose thread here, put it across the code, which is in my hand here, and just sticking like crazy already. Just rub it a few times to try and get a little bit of it on this thread. That's loading up the thread with a bit there. It's probably enough. What I'm now going to do, if I can get this off my skin, it does get everywhere. It's amazing stuff. It's just so sticky. Right, roughly find a midway point, put the loop over my Cordwainers spinning top, put my finger between 2 strands, and then just start turning the top with my hand like that. And it's a bit like a drop spindle when you're weaving. I'm basically here just now twisting these threads together, and as I twist them I'm letting the spinning top drop down. So that's one way of making a 2-ply thread. It's a flax thread, and it's really strong, this stuff, out of a single ply. And then once I've done that, so I've got my length of thread now, if I just rub the code again up and down that thread, it will sort of help lock it, or lock that twist in quite nicely. I've got myself a little bit of warmth, a thread that won't come undone. So there you are, one proper bit of thread. Hopefully you can just about see that on camera. So that's how I think this Cordwainers spinning top was used, but as I say, I'd be delighted to hear from anyone who's done research into these and knows something more. So I got the thread. The next thing that would have traditionally have happened is one would have attached a boar's bristle. Now I have, as I say, got some thin fishing boar bristles. The proper boar bristles that you really need for this are probably about 7 inches, 8 inches long. They're quite good and solid. I mean, I did try looking at broom bristles, wondering if I could use those, but that's more like what a proper boar's bristle should look like. These I think are synthetic, but they didn't really work. I thought, well, I'd try it. Some people use wire bristles, which again is another option. But anyway, the idea here is to take a boar's bristle. Now this one, as I say, it's a fly fishing boar bristle, so it's woefully too small, but essentially that's the root which you cut off to like a point, so that becomes your needle. The back end of the bristle, you can see how they sort of splay out, a bit like cat's whiskers with split ends. We rip it down about halfway. You can then thin off this end to like a point and then put it in the gap and twist it in and turn it. I'll show you what I mean a bit closer up on the bench. So the idea here is to just take the end of the thread I've just been plying together, unply it a little bit for short length, and then try and get it to like a point. So rubbing it a few times with this screwdriver until I get like a tapered end. So that's going down a lot thinner, like that. You then, and I hope you can just about see this on camera, I then have my boar's bristle, which, as I say, should be a lot larger, so I'm not going to be using these, but it just quickly illustrate. Break it down about halfway, so I've split that whisker, just pulled it, it's like a split end. You then wedge right down to the fork in the split, you wedge your thinned end, and then you can twist down towards the point, so if you like the needle end, trying not to overlap the flax. Just do it side by side and then carry on going back up, and then try and wrap your boar's bristle around your flax. So one pinch going one way and the other pinch going the other way. And then you can rub code over the whole lot to try and get it all to stick together nicely. And that's essentially how you get a tapered end. It'd be easier if I had a proper boar bristle of the right thickness to be able to show you this a bit better, but the beauty of it is that you don't get a great swelling where the thread goes through the eye of a needle. So that's like your needle. The boar's bristle is ending about there, and then I'm going into the flax thread, and the boar's bristle is wrapped around the first bit of flax thread. So you'd use that instead of a needle and pull it through, and if you have a clean hole, it seems to work extremely well. So that is what I'd intended doing, but as I say, my holes, I've gone in from both sides. I don't have particularly clean tubes of holes, so I'm going to do it probably a more modern conventional method and just use an awl. So I'll show you that next, but that's my little diversion just to show you how I think the cobbler's spinning top, the Cordwainers spinning top, was actually used to make a thread up, and broadly how to attach a boar's hair on here. So a boar's bristle. And the suppliers of these bristles, which as I say I haven't used, I noticed on eBay there's one in the States, and in Germany a company called Minke seem to supply them as well. But yeah, there you are. Okay, back to welting. So I'm going to attach my welt by using a curved awl, and I'm going to go, that guideline I put in, I'm going to use that as my stitching line. I'm going to then go down and try and match up with the hole I'd made previously all around this top wall, around the feather edge. So in each case go along every roughly 1/4 inch, putting a hole in, and then I will use this curved awl which has a little needle point on the end here, put that down and then drag my thread through and put it through and stitch. So a bit like an easy stitcher. I noticed Bedo's Leatherworks on YouTube does it this sort of way, and he does a splendid job. So I'm taking a view, I will try that, and hopefully if I can get it half as good as he does, I'll be extremely pleased. So that's my plan. So there's a little barb is the word, isn't it? Little barb on the end of this hook, and I'll be using a bit of Ritzer thread here, again just to try and keep it smooth and for consistency, so that hooks on quite well. So that's the plan, and I will see how I go. So I'm going to take out the first nail I've got here, and using my awl try and hit the first hole. So my first hole is about there. Take my stitch line and go through. That's roughly where I want to start, and I'm hoping I can then put this one through in a similar vein and hook up my thread. So that's the sort of plan. So I'm going to hook this over the barb, and then I can pull it through. Like that. And then I'll put another running thread through this and pull it tight. So pull that down, and I'm going to knot these two so that ties it off. Pull them nice and tight. I can put a double knot on there as it's slippery wax. And that's my first stitch in position. So carrying on, I know my next hole is roughly there, so go in, oops, and come down there, extract, put my barbed awl in. I have made this too deep, so I have made my life, I think, quite difficult here. All my holes are a bit too deep. So that's gone through there. Again, pick up the barb and pull it through. Again, I should get a little loop of thread coming out this side. Pass this running thread through it. And pull it taut. And that's my next stitch in position. So I will carry on going through like this and get a nice row of stitches coming round. Well, I'm continuing my stitching going round, and it's very useful having this guide channel because it does let me get my stitch line nicely lined up. The other little thing I did was this hook awl that I'm using. The hook on it, the angle, the curvature wasn't enough. So what I've done is I put a spirit lamp on it to get the blade up to red heat, and then using some pliers I just bent it round to the same curve as my awl, and I'm finding that's a lot better. It still takes me quite a long time, but yeah, if I extract the awl now, I can put this curved one in and the tip gets nicely raised. So then I can put my thread over there and pull it back through. It's a bit fiddly, but it's working. I can then thread that line through and pull them together nice and tight. I'm going to make a leather thong for my finger actually, as I'm going to keep pulling this and get sore fingers, but that's how I'm doing it. So it is worthwhile getting the curves similar on both your tools. Anyway, I will carry on. From the side, just to say, it's looking like that, so I think that's roughly what it should be looking like. I'm pleased I didn't make this any narrower than 15mm. Well, many stitches later and I have done the welting, so that's all sewn on and that will get trimmed later on. So the next thing I'm going to be doing is putting in the rand, which is around here, and that will be in the next video. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed that one, and please subscribe if you want to see what happens next. Bye bye then. And I do have two of them.